as she saw her supplier, S.J., silhouetted in the doorway of the shack that housed her small moonshining operation. White steam puffed out of the chimney behind her. She, too, was watching the sky. "I'm heading out," called Ellie, raising her hand in farewell. "I think I'll be all right." S.J. might have nodded her head once. At least her big, thick glasses flashed, reflecting the golden light inside. But Ellie couldn't be sure. "Thanks again." S.J. shut the door. Ellie wasn't offended by this brusque dismissal. S.J. was a woman of few words, and even fewer friendly ones. She'd been like that as long as Ellie had known her, and that had been a very long time. Ellie untied her skiff, hopped on board, and rowed herself beyond the pines, sycamores, and low brush that concealed S.J.'s operation from prying eyes. Only when she was a good ways away did she start the motor. The little boat sat low in the water as Ellie navigated the choppy bay past darkly wooded shoreline and pale spits of stony beach, past fine homes with shiny new runabouts tied up to private docks and boatyards cluttered with shabbier vessels. Her small engine puttered in pleasant harmony with the drone of the insects and the last few cries of the gulls. A light rain added some gentle percussion just after her first handoff, where she exchanged 2 full swing-top bottles for 2 empties, and some cash, of course. The widow Hawkins might be a shut-in, but she didn't mind getting a bit of fresh air whenever Ellie tied up in the shadows beneath the trailing branches of the old willow at the edge of her property. Undeterred, Ellie pulled on her oilskin. A little rain didn't bother her. In fact, the changeable nature of Long Island's weather was a source of continuous joy to her. While ominous, the churning sky above her was beautiful, and the first line of a new poem came to her as she dropped off more bottles along her route. "The wind is east and the sky is gray," she said aloud as said wind gusted under her hood, knocking it back off her head. "There's going to be a shower tonight." She stopped composing when the rain began to fall in earnest. Her handoffs, which usually entailed an exchange of gossip as well as goods, became brief and hurried, with no more than a "stay dry" shouted at her over the worsening downpour. More than one customer offered to let her tie up and wait out the storm inside, but she decided it was safe enough to make the crossing over to Jones Beach Island. Rocky was expecting her. Todd Rocky, rock meddler, was Ellie's last stop on her usual route. A poet by trade, he'd moved to the area after he'd cracked, to use his word for it. Life in the city had stressed him to nervous exhaustion. He'd used the last of the advance from his first book to buy a derelict bungalow between Gilgo and Oak Beach in the hope that peace and isolation would help him finish a second. He had, and in record time. He'd been so inspired by his far-flung paradise that he now lived there year-round, and in all but the very worst of weather. The crossing to get to Rocky's house was typically quick and easy, but halfway there the rain switched direction and the final leg of the trip got soggy. Though Ellie had intended to say merely a brief hello, by the time she pulled up at the dock and trekked across the rickety boardwalk to his little house on the ocean side of the island, she was more than happy to accept his invitation to come in, dry off, and warm up with a bit of what she'd brought him. Wrapped in a towel, her clothes dripping and steaming by the cast-iron wood-burner, Ellie shivered as Rocky bumbled about, unable as usual to remember where he'd left the poker or the kettle or the tea. The place was so small there were a limited number of places any of it could be. Even so, he never seemed able to put anything in the same place twice. Ellie had met Rocky when he'd been wandering around a fish market, looking bemused by the bright-eyed hauls of snook and flounder. They'd hit it off quickly. Ellie had been pleased to befriend a real poet, and then had been pleased to be seduced by one. Rocky hadn't been the first to make Ellie moan that way as he pawed her small, heavy breasts, but he'd certainly been the most glamorous. At least she'd thought so at the time. Having gotten to know him better over the years, she couldn't help but smile ruefully when he found the poker by stubbing his toe on it, and then burned his finger putting the kettle on to heat. Rocky might possess a strange grace while speaking about poetry or making love to her, or her favorite, both at the same time. But otherwise he was hopelessly clumsy. "I can't believe you went out in this,"